questions. The first question is, to what extent can objectives of the pharmaceutical manufacturing associations align with those of government? And also, building from the audience, how do we bridge the trust and information gap?
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I'm happy to have had your queries. I'm going to give a brief prehistory on much of what we've discussed, but bringing out the picture of collaboration and the involvement of association and our impact up to where we are. So I want to begin with the Bangladesh model. When the team led by Mr. Nazim compiled that report for the Bangladesh model, we actually incorporated the use of that Bangladesh model in developing an East African pharmaceutical roadmap action plan. And that plan has been in place since, I think, 2015 up to around 2022. It was supposed to be ending 2022 or 2023, to be clear. And when I look at that action plan, I read it myself. It had around 6 pillars of development of manufacturing, touching regulatory capacity, touching policy, touching IPs and the technology transfer, and various other things like subsidies. And from that action plan, we've actually managed to utilize it to push for the development of pharmaceutical companies in the country. I have been in UPMA since around 2018, and from the time UPMA started from 2011 up to around 2016, we were 6 members. He can certify to that, with only around 3 large manufacturers. That was Cipla, KPI, Abacus, and Rene grew to a large manufacturer at the time. But when we look at the utilization of that to where we are right now, I can guarantee you when you go to the registries of NDA, we are in Uganda having 60 pharmaceutical manufacturers, all through the drives implemented through the utilization of the action plan that we implemented. And now the turnovers the investments in the pharmaceutical sector in Uganda currently have risen from way back, which was around in the ranges of $20 to $30 million, but right now we are even netting somewhere around $500 million in the sector. So there has been that drive of participation of the association in suggesting such policies. However, when I looked at the pharmaceutical manufacturing plan, which we have been operating under, I came to an understanding that we have exhausted its use. The dynamics of pharma have changed. That is why a gentleman who was here yesterday asking, why is it that we people who sit to discuss about pharma do not drive our objectives as the Uganda Manufacturers Association? It's because the driving factor in pharma is different from other industries. I cannot have to sit for over 5 years to plan on how I'm going to grind sugar and extract sucrose out of it. But if I'm going to plan on how to develop a vaccine, for example, as we've been discussing here, somebody told you it can even take you 7 years to do technology transfer. So you are not going to make such a decision in a day without building an ecosystem around it to support its implementation and sustenance. So we have reached at a point whereby we've learned that as manufacturers and associations, we need to be engaged in policies to drive our agenda in the long term. So one time, that's before the start of the presidential elections in 2021, I myself wrote a manifesto 2-page later, targeting what the president should put into his agenda for the development of the pharmacy sector in Uganda. And one of the focal points I enlightened in that agenda were the inability of having a focal point of contact in government for pharma manufacturers. The report went to the president, but I never got feedback from it. And we've not sitting back because we know policy affects us in what we do. That is why recently when we phoned people of National Planning Authority, we've written to you because we know that in order to drive our agendas to promote pharma in the country, we have to get a seat at the table, and we have to do it ourselves to defend our agendas. Because even if we send a minister or any other government official who's not an expert in what we do, when he's put in a Q&A, he won't be able to defend what we do. So we are in the drive of trying to build strongly that framework of cooperation, because it is the first start point for us to go ahead. All the problems we address in pharma manufacturing will keep recurring unless we have a stake in the policy making. That is where we are. Then another concern, which is touching vaccination. Most of us are looking at vaccination as an investment. It shocked me to realize that there is a research which was done, and it implied that for every $1 spent on a vaccine, it averts the healthcare cost expenditure of $19.8. And for every $1 spent in vaccination programs, there's an accountability of improving of a health lifespan of a person equivalating to $52.2. What does this imply? When you look at the past, we used to have around 300, for example, polio. Polio killed close to 400 million people as per this current statistics. Right now, when you research areas that are being affected by polio, we are nearing a point of total eradication of polio. And that is because of vaccination. So vaccination as a project is expensive, but we have to come to an understanding that us as a continent, this is our health security area. So when we look and lobby, when we look and lobby for its financing, let's put that in mind. So what I wanted to elaborate on. Let me give other members thanks.
Thank you so much. Gertrude, building on that conversation, how do we bridge the trust and information gap?
Thank you. But then Yusuf has summarized it all for us. Anyhow, let's add to his wise advices here. How do we build trust? If I may pick key phrases in the conversation that led to our facilitator asking that question. Is government hearing industry, and are the associations aligning with government objectives? Because the associations are representing industry. When I said Yusuf has summarized, I had some thoughts, and then he really picked on those. But then I thought this is good because it means that us who are sitting here have got similar objectives for where we want to take industry in Africa. Similar, just coming from different spaces according to our experience. Can I just pick what was said on the table here about let's change the word vaccine and start it in about 7, 10 years, 5, 10 years, something like that. What Yusuf said about how long it will take to plan for vaccines says that we need to start now, and we need to have the word vaccine so that we are focused as to what is needed. Because if we base ourselves on all the other formulations, by the time we start vaccines, we'll have lost a lot in terms of this investment that Yusuf explained. So in starting now, can I just bring, sorry, give me a minute extra for time. Can I just bring a case in point that exemplifies what we're talking about this morning? The rollout of ARVs in South Africa, right? Is government listening to industry? Industry is driven by what the opportunities in the communities are presenting. And HIV came in, HIV and AIDS, and industry was bringing ARVs. And South African government, is public news, so I will quote it, South African government said no. South Africans are going to have good nutrition, garlic, and what other vegetables. This was all over. The Minister of Health went to Canada and had a display of garlic in Canada and said, this is the South African objective. Our people are going to have nutrition. It was, she's not listening. I wish, can I have her attention? Because she kicked me into this thinking. Somebody, please. Because Robina reminded me of that. No, madam, sorry. Just that you gave me that flicker to say, yes, ARVs. It was civil society that moved the South African government to have to change its objectives on how they deal with HIV and AIDS. So, is government listening to industry? Industry brought the ARVs, but government wasn't listening because they had the vegetables and the fruits and the garlic on their soil. But then civil society, whatever it took, they moved government, and government had to talk to industry to say, what ARVs do you have, which ones are. Civil society is one factor in society that the associations should, after this meeting, should be looking at how to communicate, how to have platform, how to befriend, how to have trust relationships with civil society. Because when civil society moves, government moves. And then the alignment with government objectives, it comes out full circle that today you are talking vaccines. Civil society, if the industry societies can explain to civil society that vaccines, as Yusuf has pointed out, this is what saves people. This is what will save the continent. This is what will create employment also for the continent, for the people in the continent. When they understand that and they move, that makes the work easier for the associations. We're trying to think of other solutions, but she just put that and made me remember the ARVs in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Emmanuel, I'd just like to ask you a question that one of the audience members raised, which I find interesting. One of the audience members said that there's a perception that industry is very profit driven. How can industry or balance, the health considerations versus the profit drive? How can this be done in order to take away this perception?
All right, thank you very much. I just want to, before I touch on that question, I just want to touch on the why does government not listen to industry and why and so forth. I'll tell you a story. You have to make noise as associations. When I became chairman of the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association, I got into a publication, and the headlines was that the pharmaceutical industry on the brink of collapse. And I wrote an article with one of the journalists, and it came out in the main publication. And basically it was saying that the industry is collapsing, and there will be no industry to talk about in the next 5 years. And it created a lot of acrimony, got a lot of crap out of it, but it got the message across. Government is there to listen to the people, and they derive their mandate from the people they govern. So as industrial associations, you should not be shy about it, make noise. Use the press to get the attention of government. If government does not give you an appointment for a meeting because they're too busy, you highlight those problems in the press. And the press is normally very, very, very amenable to that and very supportive of those things. So you have to make noise. You don't have to be apologetic about it. As long as you are factual and you are to the point, you do that. There's no way about it. If you keep quiet, no one listens to you. And that's the point. Don't think that someone will come to your company and say, what do you need and how can I help you? You force yourself into that. Use parliament, get focal points, get people who can get your message across. And that way you get to be heard. Just like what civil society does. And you do that, you find that you start getting audience. Sometimes government does not know your problems. You assume that they know. And what I pointed out was that because we're in a situation where we're paying duties, VAT, for raw materials for pharmaceutical production, our imported products were duty-free, and the duties were as 10%, sometimes VAT 15%, and by the time you land raw material on your factory floor, you'd have paid more than 60% in tariffs and so forth. And those you could not recoup. So those are the points that are highlighted. And also then that's when I got involved in the UNIDO and so forth. And we had to get UNIDO to come and do a research on the Zimbabwean industry and come out with a strategy to revive the industry. And there was a lot of resistance on the part of government, to the extent that because UNIDO deals with government, it doesn't deal with individual companies or associations. So I had to get the foreign ministry to write a letter approving UNIDO to come into the country, and it took almost 6 months to get it written, moving from one office to the next and so forth. But it got done. And as a result, through those engagements, we managed to get the relief that we're seeking. And that was a turning around point for the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry in Zimbabwe. So the point is, don't be shy about it, make noise. As much noise as you can. No one will kill you for that. But at the end of the day, they will listen. And that's the point I wanted to put across. With regard the perception that industry is profiteers, or manufacturers profiteers at the expense of patients, that's something that is normally, because people, when they go and buy a box of paracetamol syrup for $1 or 50 cents or $5, they complain. But someone can go into a pub and buy a tot of whiskey at $10 or $15. The same person, when he goes to a pharmacy, is not prepared to pay $5 for a course of amoxicillin or an antibiotic. So I think it's a value system. People need to understand the importance of health, and that needs to be put across to everybody. And they need to appreciate what it takes to manufacture a quality medicine. So most of it is just education, and education, there's no compromise about it. And also the cost of medicine is sometimes taken as the price that you pay on the counter when you go to a prescription. But it's much more than that. You might find that an imported product might be 50 cents, whilst a locally produced product is 60 cents. From an economic cost perspective, you find that the local product could actually be much cheaper from that perspective, because it's not the price that you look at it. What are the economic benefits? There was a study that was done in South Africa on ARVs, which showed that a local product, a locally produced ARV product, as long as it is 30% more expensive than an imported product, it is still economically cheaper to produce locally. And they use that to get support when they go on public tender, to the extent that the South African Tender Board, or the Public Procurement Authority in South Africa, was giving local manufacturers a 30% price advantage. And as long as they're 30% more expensive than an imported product, they were awarded the tender. And they were given 70% preference on all products that they are procuring from, that they're floating, for the tenders that they're floating. So the point is, make noise, please. Don't even be shy about it. Keep on making noise until government hears you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll move on to Nazim. Yesterday you talked about the possibility of global North-South partnerships, especially with technology transfer. I'd like you to elaborate more about this, because yesterday you said that it takes ordinarily 7 years. What could be done? Is there a possibility of partnerships to sort of lessen the years, to make tech transfer more possible for the African pharmaceutical manufacturing market? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the one I referred to was specifically for vaccine, and that's really complex. And I think, as the colleague has just said, I think let's leave vaccines out of it for the moment. If I think I probably speak for all the countries here. All our governments have a public-private partnership policy, right? But then if you look at the countries and say, how many PPPs have actually happened in our country? And I think often the answer is very, very few. Very, very few. And if you look at the pharma sector, at least in East Africa, there are very few companies I can think of where they've actually partnered. I mean, one is in Kenya, because Universal, but that essentially has been bought over by an Indian company, right? Correct? Yeah, it's a 51% share from, that's owned by an Indian company. So that's a kind of different type of partnership, right? I mean, the CIPLA QCIL, which until recently is a good, interesting example to study on if a government gets involved, things can happen. I mean, I know, and it's public knowledge, there are particularly many civil society organizations that feel that was perhaps not a very fair deal, but that's, if you put that aside, I mean, actually the government got interested for all sorts of reasons. They gave good incentives, and they built a good company. So we now have an international standard company in Uganda, right, through some tech transfer. And CIPLA brought in a lot of technology, including lots and lots of, when they started building it, I think there were 60 Indians here, living on campus, building the facility. So it happens. But the thing about tech transfer is the person that's giving technology must also get something. So that's where we have often a challenge, because if there is no policy in that country to say, look, we will give incentives to the tech person who's giving us the technology, why should they, right? Because they're also they also need to make money, right? So it's not a philanthropic industry, and there are so many examples that without making money, you just collapse. I mean, in Arusha, there is a fantastic company which was built by European money called PI. It never started. It was built to make ARVs, and all sorts of things happened. It never started. So, so Europeans are saying, we put in 6 million euros, and this was about 20 years ago nearly. And they built, probably at that time, the best company in East Africa in terms of quality. It was built by a German company. It was built to absolutely international standards. It was the government owned 40% of it, yes. And then the 60% was owned by 9 individuals. One of them we know very well. And it collapsed. It breaks my heart. I mean, because, and I can tell you, when I was working for the Raja Khan Group, we wanted to buy it. They wouldn't even sell it to us because they had such a high view of how much it was worth. And now, 15 years later, it's just there. A brand new pharmaceutical plant with the best HVAC system you've ever seen, So I think there's got to be policies which will say, look, yes, we want this technology, but for that we will give you this, right? So it's got to be some sort of, and it's got to be a 50-50. And I think sometimes we have suffered from, particularly from the Indian subcontinent, their concept of partnership is, they get 65, 75 or something, we get 25. That in the long term is not going to work, unless the strategy is that they will buy you out, which is fine also, but that should be understood at the start, right? So yes, technology, and we've talked about, and my colleagues who run facilities here know better than I. Currently we are all producing very basic, simple medicines. Our disease burden is changing dramatically. It already has. We have sadly picked up all the not very nice habits of Mzungus. We're sitting too many, discussing too many meetings, eating too much rubbish. Our diabetes is going to the roof. We all have high cholesterol levels. We've got cancers, but we're not producing those drugs. We're not producing those drugs. And for some of those drugs, we will need technology that doesn't exist here. And it's always better to get it from somewhere rather than invent it, right? So yeah. So yes, we need technology transfer, but the market has to be ripe for it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nazim. Nice. I'd like to get your perspective, the civil society perspective. What are opportunities presented under the African Continental Free Trade Area in terms of pharmaceutical manufacturing associations?
Thank you so much, Maria. My name once again is Musa Nanais, and I work for Siatini. We work to provide alternative policies for development in terms of trade, fiscal, and investment-related policies and processes. I would like to approach this from an angle of Pan-Africanism. The issue to do with developing the pharmaceutical industry in Africa comes from actually, it relates to Pan-Africanism. But for those who have had a glimpse on how Pan-Africanism has come a long way and all the challenges it has been coming through, you bear me witness, it's still a long journey to take. How do we appreciate this? From a civil society angle. If we do not, or if we continue to take health as a commodity, we shall continue having these issues moving around back and forth in meetings and discussing issues, and when we present our proposals, they are rejected or they are later looked at as best endeavor. So let us look at health as a human right. That is when you look at liberalizing and also regulating certain things. The Africa Free Continental Trade Area is here for us all. It is here for all the associations to provide that common market for all commodities, and also to facilitate trade within the intra-African continent. It has a wide range of opportunities. It kicked off the Trade Guided Initiative, and a number of commodities are being traded. But however, it has not been without its challenges. But they all stem from issues to do with national interests. We are still having a challenge of national interests. Countries instituting trade barriers, tariffs that impede trade. That is a great challenge. But what are we also doing as government in order to facilitate free movement of goods? We look at it, the discussion has been around developing our pharmaceutical strength and all that. But the gist of the matter is, can we favorably compete? Issues of health need regulation. Let us regulate the market, especially for health. I know we are, as African states, we depend a lot on funds from the global north, and they come with a number of stringent conditions behind. For instance, the liberalization of our markets, especially, has led to even the drop of industries. In Ginger here, we used to have a number of industries that are cropping up during the days, the early booming of Uganda during that time. But he took the step of liberalizing the market. Now our industries here cannot compete with those ones out. And that creates a sort of fear for even our local manufacturers to even establish certain plants, because they cannot favorably compete with the giants. It needs to take a step of regulating the market. Whether they institute quotas, let them institute the quotas. Regulate, because health is a human right. And then that will give leverage for our manufacturers to favorably trade their commodities across all borders, even through even using leveraging on the opportunities provided by the Africa Free Continental Trade Area. But also we see there is issues of transportation. There was some issues where a number of commodities were stuck because they couldn't move. Well, it was in Uganda, apparently. Yeah, they couldn't transport their coffee to, to Senegal or where? Issues of transportation. There's still a challenge, but all it stems out from the policies that we also make as duty bearers and also as associations. But we need to feel the impact. We need to feel the footprint of FAPMA. We need to feel it deep on ground in the policy, in civil society and also in the government. Does FAPMA have at least in each country on this continent an office somewhere where we feel that all associations are represented well, all their views? Yeah, we need to see to it that that coordination is brought out strongly. Yeah, so the opportunities within the FCFTA are wide, but we also need to take it to the angle of calling out to our duty bearers, how on issues of how they can regulate and also promote the local industries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nice. I would like to move the needle a bit and ask Dr. Emmanuel Higenyi his experience. We've been talking about collaboration with government. Would like to know, as the audience, your experience, how that has been, and how you've been able to collaborate with government in order to further your objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Higenyi. So to put a difference between my namesake, Dr. Emmanuel, so I can be called Dr. Higenyi. I am working with the Joint Medical Store, which is a supply chain organization at national level, but for the private sector, the equivalent of National Medical Store for the public sector. So collaboration and engagement with the government is key, and our experience as Joint Medical Store shows that number one, we need to have platforms for engagement. We need to have very clear platforms of engagement. However, what we have seen working well is have memoranda of understanding, signing memorandum of understanding with the government, which clearly spells out the roles and responsibilities, and then being very accountable to the government. We've worked with especially through the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Finance. These are very key entities, the Ministry of Health and Ministry of Finance, and we've seen that in terms of budgeting, they need information ahead of time. You need to, because the budgeting cycle for government begins very early. So if you are going to have your agenda clearly accommodated, you need to be very, very smart in terms of when to engage government. Because for instance, right now we are now going to October. The budget for the next financial year is already being cast. So you cannot go to them in March and say I have an agenda. It will not be there. So learning how to work with government is very important. And also, sometimes approaching government can be a bit challenging, but we can know how to work with civil society. So sometimes we work with civil society to engage government. So we work very closely, like the one of Robina and the HEPS. So this is a very important way of how to engage government. And then the fourth one is to know the value you want to bring on the table. Government is interested in solving issues, but also they want value. So we have to demonstrate that this is what we are going to bring on the table, and we are filling this gap. So in that case, then you need a constituency. You need a constituency. Without a constituency, government will think you are not bringing anything on the table without a constituency. So for example, for Joint Medical Store, we have a constituency. We have over 700 health facilities that we actually serve. So this constituency is very strong for Joint Medical Store, going to 40% of the healthcare output in the country. So sometimes the government wants to believe that for you to stock something, there must be some constituency behind you. So in this case of vaccine, there must be a constituency. And I was just chatting with Robina here about the veterinary. They have a very big constituency, and the constituency doesn't talk, but people talk on their behalf, those animals. So now, it's a big one, and for that matter, the government can say, oh, so what is your constituency? And although I have been telling also some of my vet colleagues, they have not done a census of their constituents. They don't know how many animals they have. But anyway, for the humans, we know that these vaccines can serve, like our colleague was enumerating on the cost benefit if we go for vaccines. This is very important. So demonstrating that we have a constituency that will go with us will be important for working with government. And then